5 disturbing true crime stories. Number 1. The Boy in the Box. A college student discovered a small boy's remains in a Philadelphia forest in February 1957 and informed the authorities of his horrifying find. After being severely battered, the boy was discovered and buried inside an old bassinet box. Nobody knew who he was. Although a number of people came forward with information about the case, the police were unable to corroborate any of the witnesses. Martha, one of the women, said her violent mother had purchased the boy. He endured physical and intimacy assault inside their roof. Martha provided information to the police about matters that had not been made public, which piqued their curiosity in her account. She said that the youngster had eaten baked beans just before he was deleted by beating. She further asserted that he had taken a bath prior to his deletion, which was consistent with the coroner's discovery of water-pruned fingers. Despite the fact that Martha's testimony appeared to support the evidence, her extensive history of mental illness rendered her an untrustworthy source. Another lead came from a psychic who, despite never having seen the foster home, described it perfectly as being close to where the boy had been found. Remington Bristol, who worked for the examiner's office, went to the foster home as instructed by the psychic. He found a bassinet inside that fit the description of the bassinet box the boy had been found in. In addition, he discovered blankets that resembled the one encircling the boy's body. Bristol's findings were also rejected because there was no substantial evidence to implicate the foster parents. The Boy in the Box case is still open 62 years later. Although mock images of the boy's possible appearance have been made possible by facial reconstruction technology, no one has ever come forward to claim him. There has also been unsuccessful attempts at DNA and dental testing. To this day, no one knows who the Boy in the Box is. Number 2. The Icebox Murders. Charles, the grown son of Fred and Edwina Rogers, was living in Houston in 1965. Charles was a reclusive and antisocial person, so the family in their quiet neighborhood kept to themselves. Since Charles left the house early every day and didn't come back until well after dusk, many neighbors were actually unaware that he lived at home with his parents. A family member contacted the Houston police to inquire about the welfare of his elderly aunt and uncle after not hearing from Rogers for a few days. Though they couldn't find Fred and Edwina, the patrolmen did see food on the dining room table. When they opened the refrigerator, they saw several packages of meat neatly piled up on top of one another. Then they saw that the vegetable bin contained 2 human heads. When more police arrived on the horrifying scene, they carefully took the packages containing several body parts out of the refrigerator. Fred and Edwina Rogers' remains were found. According to the police, Fred had been severely beaten in the head, and Edwina had been beaten and shot. His genitalia had been removed and his eyes gouged out. The insides of the couple had been disposed of in the toilet. There was no sign of Charles. Charles was, of course, the main suspect in this horrible crime, but he appeared to have disappeared from the face of the planet. Even though the police were unable to gather circumstantial evidence against him, Charles Rogers was never found. Number 3. Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott started getting threatening phone calls at work at the beginning of 1980. She was a single mother of a toddler who initially paid little attention to the calls until the ominous voice on the other end of the line instructed her to go outside one evening. On her car's windshield rested a lone dead rose. The guy who had obtained her number would alternate between declaring his love for her and making threats to hurt her. Dorothy told a number of her relatives and friends that the voice on the phone sounded familiar, but she was having trouble identifying who it was. She never had the opportunity to learn. Her co-workers in court stated that they went outside to meet her in a parking lot when she failed to return. They thought there was an emergency involving her son because they witnessed her car speeding away at that very moment. Dorothy never came home to her son and didn't communicate with anyone else. Her burnt bones were discovered at a building site 4 years later. The discovery of the set of dog bones adjacent to her remains adds even more intrigue to the case. Even though the case is still being discussed online, no one has ever been found guilty or placed under suspicion, and the caller's identity remains a mystery. Number 4. The Chicago Tylenol Murders. A 12-year-old girl in Chicago died soon after taking an extra-strength Tylenol in September of 1982. A man who had taken the same medication died in a hospital that same day. His 2 family members came after. More seemingly healthy people in Chicago passed away over the course of the following few weeks. The only thing they had in common was that they had taken extra-strength Tylenol just prior to their tragic demise. It was found that many of the extra-strength Tylenol pills had been laced with potassium cyanide, leading Johnson & Johnson to recall the bottles. Following the public announcement, Johnson & Johnson ran a number of advertisements cautioning customers not to use the product. The business started feverishly developing a triple-sealed package that would guard against manipulation. James William Lewis, who lived in New York City, wrote to Johnson & Johnson accusing them of manipulating the bottles and adding cyanide to the capsules. He was asking for $1 million to get him to stop. Despite not being found guilty, he was still imprisoned for extortion after being arrested for the crime. Even after Johnson & Johnson had strengthened the seal on their Tylenol bottles to prevent tampering, similar crimes across the nation were sparked by widespread news of what had transpired in Chicago. More than one person passed away as a result of cyanide poisoning from other over-the-counter drugs. One of the rare true crime tales that has actually caused significant change in the nation is the Chicago Tylenol murders. Both the security and pharmaceutical packaging and quality control increased tenfold. Although there was insignificant evidence for the FBI to convict anyone, it is generally accepted that James William Lewis and his wife were accountable for the crime. Number 5. The Girl Scout Murders. 3 young Girl Scouts were murdered and intimately assaulted in the summer of 1977 while they were camping in Oklahoma. The 3 girls were 8 to 10 years old: Lori, Michelle, and Doris. In her possession, a camp counselor discovered an unsettling message approximately 2 months prior to the deletions. The offender vowed to delete 3 camp children. The camp counselor decided to disregard the threatening note as a joke because she was aware that the young campers liked to tell scary stories around the campfire. This was a mistake she would later come to regret. On June 13th, early in the morning, the girls' bodies were discovered outside the path that led to the camp showers, still in their sleeping bags. The perpetrator only left a bloody footprint and a red flashlight as proof. The main suspect in the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders was an escaped prisoner named Jean Leroy Hart. Raised just a mile from Camp Scott, Hart was on the loose at the time of the murders, having escaped from a prison sentence he was serving for intimate assault, kidnapping, and burglary. A local jury found Hart not guilty of the crime due to insufficient evidence. Police in Oklahoma, however, believe the case is closed. Whether Gene Leroy Hart got away with murder or whether someone else was the real murderer is still a mystery. In either case, the killer of the girls never saw justice.